I would like to know, how did you transition from being monogamous to non-monogamous, and if you can share with us a little bit of your journey and how it was.
Sure. So it's actually kind of embarrassing. So I remember when I moved to London, I had a date with someone, and he was like, not into traditional relationships. And I was like, what does that mean? And he looked at me and he told me, I remember my mouth, my jaw dropping, and he looked at me like, what? I can have a relationship like that? So after that, I started to actually consider, what is it that I wanted from my relationships? And it really empowered me to start to think about, if I don't follow the norms of a relationship, what can I follow? And so that journey has really led me to where I am today, which is actually, I'm probably one that wants to live on my own. I love the relationships in all of my life, and it's taken me quite a bit to get here, but there's always something to learn, and it's quite awesome. Yeah, so that's probably the transition for me.
Thank you, Jackie. Anyone has questions in regards to this?
By the way, there's a whole empty bench in front, so if people want to come and sit in front, so we don't have to look at an empty bench. That'd be really nice.
We're not gonna buy it. It's fine.
Well, speak for yourself.
Consensually.
Yeah, but we're not. Yeah, consensually. Only fun bites. It's really safe here.
Thank you, guys. Sorry, I'm a bit tall. I'm sorry. Thank you. Okay, so in line with my presentation, I would like to hear your views on using online apps today, and what do you think in regards to what I said? Do you agree, you don't agree? What's your views, what's your takes? I don't know who wants to take that.
I started using dating apps pretty much as soon as I started dating. I very much back kind of like dating apps as a way to meet people personally. Or like all of my current partners are people I met on dating apps, specifically Field. Because I think it's very difficult to date as a non-monogamous person, like in the wild, so to speak, because on a dating app, like on your profile, you can openly declare that you're polyamorous, non-monogamous, whatever. And if people don't like it, they can swipe left. And obviously there are scenarios where they swipe right and then they get mad at you because they didn't read your profile. But, for the most part, it's still much easier than, just going to, I don't know, God knows where, like a bar, a club, wherever, and having to kind of explain your situation to, the average person who is probably monogamous. Just personally, I found dating apps to be much easier for me as a non-monogamous person. I think just like I kind of have to use them out of necessity, because I would rather do that than kind of take a chance in like the real world, I guess, have to explain my situation to a bunch of people, potentially be judged, potentially be ostracized, I think for kind of more traditional relationships, I think there are more options. That's why I'm grateful that there are dating apps that specifically cater to non-monogamous people, and even kind of mainstream dating apps like Hinge are adding kind of more relationship style kind of options, and acknowledging that like monogamous people tend to want to date other monogamous people, and non-monogamous people want to find other non-monogamous people. So having those filters is really useful. I like using dating apps.
So as a counterpoint, it could be a generational thing, and I have used apps in the past, and I think as a man dating, it's a very different experience on non-monogamous specific dating apps, because the experience of a lot of women is that many men are just there looking for sex. So there's like already I guess a judgment or a bias where I feel like basically people are in a protective stance, women especially. And for me, while I have been and I have had some dates, I didn't really have actual relationships from apps, and all of my partners I've met in real life. And that would be at kind of non-monogamous socials and meetups and parties, or speed dating that happened too, but yeah, but it was all kind of in person. And I prefer that because, especially if it's in a setting where people who are there already know that this is for non-monogamous people, that you don't necessarily have to like explain that, that's like already given. And then the conversation could be a lot more open, a lot more intimate, or really quickly, which means that you can say kind of get a sense right away if there's a click, if there's chemistry, because you can go deeper pretty quickly. So, in a way, saving you the first date.
I'm sorry, I also agree. So, I don't know about all of you, but when you swipe right and you meet them in person, you're like, oh, it's not the same. I think for me, being non-monogamous, especially now, it's made me more brave to go out to somebody and give them a compliment and speak to them and ask them out. I didn't really do that in the past, but I find now, if anything, because I've taken ownership of the lifestyle I want, when I meet somebody, yeah, I do have to sometimes have the explanation, and sometimes, yes, you do have the conversation of, oh, you just want to have sex. Not true, but a lot of the times they're curious about it rather than ignorant. And so if they're curious about it, I'm like, actually, maybe they were like me a few years ago, going, oh, wow, I get this option. So for me, it's helped step out of my comfort zone. And dating apps just never really did it for me. My most successful relationships now have been all met in person through parties or in an elevator or, yeah, different things.
Which elevator?
Don't tell the Barbican.
Oh, I have a membership.
That's cool. Anyone? Any takers? Someone who's shy of speaking but wants to give me their notes, I can read them out loud. Yeah? Uh-huh. Yeah?
So what if somebody is extremely shy and doesn't know how to talk to people?
I mean, I think I'm the wrong person to ask him quite introverted,
but you know, I have a partner who's quite introverted, and I think like for him, he says like, you know, again, it's about kind of setting expectations in your profile on dating apps, like, you know, maybe kind of saying like, oh, you know, I might be kind of slow to warm to people, but like, you know, once you get to know me, I'm XYZ. And so, you know, again, it's kind of having that like caveat and kind of preface so that people kind of, I guess, to an extent, like know kind of like how to approach you. So I think the way he described it was like, you know, my dating profile kind of bio is essentially like a manual for how to speak to me and how to kind of date me and kind of what I like and what I dislike. So I think in that sense, kind of dating apps have been useful for him. But in other ways, you know, like I have other kind of introverted friends who also kind of prefer to meet people in real life because dating apps can be overwhelming and can be a bit of a slog. So yeah, I can kind of see, you know, how, yeah, it's just individual preference really, I think.
Sorry, I forget. But I guess this one's for Roy, maybe. I do think I'm a mix between intro and extro, and I prefer offline, but I find it incredibly difficult to meet people offline and online. So are there any sort of tips? And this is neutral, not poly, no, it's just, yeah.
So first of all, I think that sometimes getting more self-confidence and working on specific ways in which you can engage in mutual kind of common interests and things like that can help. There are, whether it's monogamous or non-monogamous, you have hiking clubs, you have all kinds of games clubs, you have activity-based events where you don't necessarily have to talk, you can do something with someone, you know, and like find common. And if you go into something that you already know that you enjoy, that it's a hobby of yours, other people there already have something in common with you. So that can be a great way to start that. And but I think building self-confidence, whether it's through coaching or through kind of improv or yeah, any kind of like workshop-related stuff where you get to act and be on stage, stuff like that, just like challenging it a little bit in that area can give people a lot of self-confidence. Also like speaking, public speaking as a like Toastmasters and stuff like that, there's all kinds of ways to do that and just like build up your self-confidence.
Yeah.
I also want to question why you're hesitant. So for me, I know thinking about others in that position, a lot of the times it could be fear of rejection. Could be not sure if you're in the right mood or in the right place, or you're not sure what they're going to look like if it's online. So by having those questions or reflective time, then it allows me to start to go, okay, how can I, some of us like games. So a friend of mine used to go, okay, I'm going to try to get rejected as many times as possible. And they did. And it helped build that self-confidence so that they could actually go out and start asking people out. Another element could be, okay, if I'm nervous of rejection, another example is, what am I telling myself? What is the narrative in my head and the fear that's coming through? And how do I start to talk to myself better so that I start taking action? Because a lot of the time, you can put yourself in that setting and really enjoy it, but you're still like, oh my God, I like this person. I'm so scared. But if you start talking to yourself through that, you're going to be able to talk yourself through that fear, I think.
Yeah. Cool, thank you. I got the first question from the public, and it is, does having more dating apps available destroy our human connections due to the ease and comfort? I don't think there's one single answer, right? I don't know about this guy. I mean, I can give you an anthropology. I'll go back to freedom because I think it does revolve around that. So connections have become so available and having choices that they have become almost disposable. And with that comes this aspect of yeah, maybe they are too easy to get and not human enough. But at the same time, intrinsically, nothing has changed for us. We still seek connection. We still seek freedom. Our values are still our inner needs are still the same. And in that regard, I guess it is about creating those spaces and gaining agency in our bodies and our sexuality and our options. So the answer from me is that no, human connections are not gone. But if we don't make an effort, they could be seen as disposable. I don't know, for Roy, what it's like.
I do think there's something to the ease at which people can both connect and disappear and reject, without any kind of consequences. And that's not just the dating app, it's also social media, the way we communicate with each other on social media, the way people get attacked for having different views and opinions. The way people are so easily get carried away with a particular trend, and again, because there isn't an actual person that they are insulting or attacking, it's just the screen. And I think the same happens with dating. So in that sense, yes. And it's, yeah, I'm not particularly happy about it. I do think that there are also pros, like, you get to access and meet and connect with people who you would never meet in real life, like outside of your circle of friends or your socio-economic kind of grouping and different cultures, and I think that can be a really beautiful thing in terms of bringing people together. So I think we just have to adjust to have awareness of the shortcomings of this technology, and hopefully find forums like this one, or even at school, to, I guess, bring more kind of human-centered, kind of transpersonal education that teaches the value of real connection, of authentic connection.
Yeah.
So kind of your question reminded me of a quote from Esther Perel, who's this Belgian psychotherapist who talks a lot about relationships and long-term desire in particular. So something that she said in a TED talk, I believe, one time was that in the past, people would leave relationships if they were unhappy, whereas now they leave relationships if they believe they could be happier. I think that that speaks to your point about how, I think with kind of like freedom of information, kind of like freedom, like just more choice generally, because of like how we're much more connected than we were ever before. Like our communities are bigger, and therefore the number of people you could potentially meet, it's a much larger pool. And so, yeah, I imagine, for some people that it can even be quite paralyzing having like that vast amount of choice, because you're like, well, how could I settle, right? Like if I have like so many options, like why wouldn't I keep kind of trying to kind of find something better and moving up and up and up, and just having these very transactional relationships. And I understand that temptation. But ultimately, yeah, like it comes down to kind of what Roy said as well, like focusing on kind of like real connection and being able to kind of like work through things rather than, I don't know, chasing the high of novelty and excitement, and abandoning ship at the first sign of conflict, because I think relationships are made through kind of working through conflict, and it's not so much like the deal breaker isn't the conflict happening. The deal breaker is like kind of how you repair from it, I think. So yeah, dating apps do have contributed to like more options, more choice, and therefore kind of people, I suppose, more temptation. But then that doesn't mean we can't we can't kind of work on like resisting that. And I think kind of your point tying it to social media and how like our attention spans generally are just getting worse and worse, kind of also kind of speaks to that. Yeah.
Yeah, in everything I read, thank you for that, Leanne and Roy. No, I do agree, but in everything I read, and I got reached out by a lot of people, no, apparently I shouldn't use it because of the speaker. In everything I read, people agreed, and I got approached by people in America, actually, on LinkedIn. They are creating new apps, basically. So it's not a moving away from technology, it's more like working around technology to create those connections. So a friend of mine, ex-colleague, she's creating an app only for Gen Z, and the premise of the app is really thorough, deep connections. So they're gonna show only, I think it's 10 or even less matches. But I think there are other apps that are already doing that. So instead of showing you the whole pool, they're just gonna minimize the number of people that they're showing, and it's just making things simpler. So I think there's something to it in reducing options, in making it less cluttered for people. And maybe just as I laugh about it, but there is something to the AI enhanced experience of helping you match better. Because at the moment with online apps, it's up to us and our criteria. And also I have read, and the data is shocking, that the things that we value are actually not the things that make us happy. We think that someone tall who's been to university, who earns a lot of money, is going to make us happy, and apparently the data says no, it's none of that. It's actually, I think it's values, and maybe you can comment on that.
Actually, the whole idea of AI doing our matching for us really scares me, terrifies me. Limiting age, for example, is one way in which we basically are creating, a scarcity mindset. By limiting the options. I get that it can be simple and sometimes people are like overwhelmed by choice, but at the end of the day, love and attraction and all chemistry is not something that an AI can determine. I don't think so. If they can, we're living in a dystopian world really. So it has to be that meeting where you have the pheromones and you have the, the eye connection, and you there's something there, and I don't want the computer to decide to like limit that pool for me. There's like Black Mirror episodes about that kind of stuff, and it's dystopian.
It can go dystopian very quickly, indeed.
Yeah.
I could keep talking about this because it's like my passion, but I do want to hear from people if people want to comment. Yeah, Mike.
If you want, the biggest thing I've learned is how to communicate with people, and it's not just how I communicate to the other person, it's my best version of communication. So at the beginning, I would definitely struggle to do face-to-face communication. It definitely was scary, and I explained to the people I saw, sometimes text was easier or sometimes email was easier. It was just so that my logical brain didn't go into that fight or flight mode, rationally think about it, and it took some time to build that. But there's so many ways that we can actually communicate now that it can help when you're working through that. So I think communication is a huge benefit regardless of what relationship style you can have. And I think monogamous relationships really miss out on that sometimes.
I've thought of three things. So I would say the first thing is kind of being able to be fully honest about your desires. Obviously, there's kind of broad brushstrokes, and not all monogamous relationships are like this, but I do find that kind of based on my personal experience of monogamy, there was a lot of you had to pretend that you weren't attracted to other people, like not even a little bit. And you know, I think it would do us all kind of, you know, a lot of good to be honest about that, even if you don't act on it, right? Because attraction doesn't necessitate action. But then, you know, there's a lot of like, oh, she's just a friend. Oh, like, you know, like, yeah, like my work wife is not, like, you know, doesn't mean anything to me. Oh, like whatever. And there's a lot of like upholding of this kind of one true love, kind of your other half, soulmate kind of type thing. That, you know, to me, when kind of I wanted to kind of explore other connections with people, felt inauthentic. And I've only, like I was in kind of a monogamous relationship in my teenage years, and I, at the time, like my partner actually ended up cheating on me. And, you know, from a very kind of, like, if you kind of look at it in a very shallow way, a lot of people would be like, oh, okay, so you're non-monogamous because your partner cheated on you, and so you can never believe that anyone would be faithful again. No, that's not the case. But I think what the cheating did reveal to me was that, like, you know, kind of him being honest with me about his desires and asking me, you know, and having a conversation with me about it where we could kind of just openly talk to each other mattered a lot more to me than the kind of breaking of trust and the betrayal and the and, you know, kind of maintaining this fiction that, like, we would never be attracted to anyone else and never want to fuck anyone else ever again. So, yeah, just kind of, so, yeah, I think the kind of being, like, true kind of authenticity about your desires and being able to honestly express them is the first thing. The second thing is flexibility, I think that, and fluidity. So I think I've been able to kind of customize my connections with people, not just my romantic ones, but also just like my friendships with people, because I no longer have to worry about like, oh, you know, if I get too close to this friend, or my partner might feel weird about that. You know, like now I can, you know, be very open about like expressing kind of like love and affection, even if it might look more kind of untraditional, with everyone in my life, really, and kind of blurring the lines between kind of what's like platonic and romantic, or like what's kind of like sexual and romantic, or what's, you know, like whatever. And you know, being able to do that has been very freeing. And I think that, like, while obviously polyamory has allowed me to explore multiple romantic and loving, intimate relationships, it's also really deepened my friendships as a result, because I no longer had to worry about what was kind of platonic, and kind of what fell outside of that. And then thirdly, group sex is really fun, I recommend it.
You can have group sex without being non-monogamous.
Well, if you're strictly monogamous, then, I mean, if you're single, sure, I guess.
If you're single, of course.
Yeah.
So I want to make a distinction between compulsory unconscious monogamy and conscious elective monogamy. Because I think that people that choose, that basically know there's options and kind of look at evaluating what's right for them and make the decision that monogamy is the right dynamic that works for them because they're monoamorous and because this is just how they want to live, then they probably have done similar amount of work that people that transition to polyamory or non-monogamy do. Saying that, like with that caveat, I would.
Oh no, the AI! They're on to us!
So who did I get matched with? So I would say that there are three things. One is being forced to confront difficult emotions like jealousy, insecurities, fears. Really helped me do so much work, self-work on myself, to become much more confident in myself as an individual, to know myself, to know my needs, my wants, my desires, and name them and not be afraid to express them. Secondly is around appreciating that I am an independent individual that is allowed to, and even it's welcome that I come with boundaries, that I express these boundaries to my partners, and they really know how to deal with me, and I know how to deal with them. So I think that meant communication, became so much easier. And Thirdly, echo something that Jan said around fluidity and flexibility is this knowledge that it's okay for a relationship to transform and change and evolve and look very, very different from where it started. Because what's important is that the person is in my life in some way, even if we're not staying in the same dynamic the whole time. And be kind of happy about that, because I'm just happy that that person stays in my life. You know, even if it transitions from romantic to friends or whatever, the dynamic might change.
Thank you.
Actually, just to tie in with that, with both of you, something someone told me once that's hit home so much is the sense of humility. And the way they put it was, yeah, all of us are humble. We tend to sometimes push ourselves down. But in reality, humility means two different things. It's avoiding vanity, which means that knowing you're not going to be the best to everyone, which was a huge lesson, and I know you both touched on it. And the other idea of humility is avoid self-loathing. So knowing when is good enough, and whatever values you do have are good enough for the people around you. And that, more than anything, has brought me forward into a better individual. So I think that ties in really nicely with what you two say.
I have comments. I also have a question from someone, but not to lose my train of thought. Why can't monogamous people have those communication, that fluidity, group sex, and all the others that you've said? Why? Like in your experience. And it's an authentic question because I really want to find the answer.
Well, the example that we discussed with the humility piece. So typically in monogamous relationships, we tend to want to be the best for the other person. We want to not be compared to by anybody else. We blow them out of the water. And that essentially means that we are vain because we don't want to sort of evolve, because we want to always be the best for that person. And the self-loathing piece is if you disappoint that person, we tend to beat ourselves up looking for the reassurance. Now, that's not always the case, but you do tend to see this in a lot of monogamous relationships.
Just on the group sex point, like, yes, you can have group sex when you're single, but having that experience with a partner and being able to kind of share in that joy together is, I think, something else. But, you know, yeah, you can absolutely go wild when you're single, absolutely. It's just, you know, it's a different vibe, I think. Yeah, I mean, you know, like, I think, like Roy said, like, you know, you kind of touched on, like, the difference between kind of, like, what's, like, kind of compulsory monogamy, which I kind of also refer to as, like, mononormativity, just the normalization kind of monogamy as an institution. Yeah, like, you know, there's a difference between that and just kind of monogamy as an authentic choice. Or, you know, even just kind of by, like, natural inclination, right? Because, like, some people, like, you know, they're monogamous just because that's kind of how they're wired, or, like, they just can't be asked to date multiple people, and that's fair enough. But, you know, and like I said, and I think, you know, like, I think we're all in agreement that, like, there are lots of things that can be implemented in monogamous relationships, absolutely. You know, it's not, like, I'm not trying to say, I don't think any of us are trying to say that monogamy is inherently unhealthy, or that, like, polyamory is inherently, like, enlightened and evolved. I don't think any of us are in that camp at all. But then, you know, I think just purely because polyamory and non-monogamy are non-normative, you're walking an unconventional path where there is no blueprint for how relationships have to look. You are forced to question things. You are forced to think about what relationships look like for yourself, and, you know, to kind of, like, yeah, like, you know, create your own path. And that can be terrifying because, yeah, I think for a lot of people, they want to do, like, what's expected of them. They want to be told kind of what's the right thing and what's reliable and consistent. But then a lot of the time, you know, that's why people kind of find themselves in, like, dead-end marriages and look back at the last 20 years and they're like, what the fuck have I been doing all my life? This isn't what I wanted. So, yeah, like, you know, I think basically, like, you know, in all, like, the things that we said, a lot of them you can have them in monogamy as well, but then I think because there's a certain kind of societal expectation of what you're supposed to do, a lot of people don't take the time to question that. But in the same way as I respect someone who identifies as straight and cis after they've gone through a journey of exploring their sexuality and gender identity and coming to the conclusion that they are kind of, you know, what they thought they were, I respect someone more for exploring kind of the different relationships and knowing what their options are, and then finally still deciding that they want to be monogamous, than someone who just never did that questioning at all and just did what everyone else was doing.
So yeah, polyamory isn't inherently enlightened and evolved, but the three of us, of course, are. It's a good question, and it's a good question because it goes to the heart of like why it's not happening, you know. Because it doesn't go examined, right? And there's a quote about the unexamined life. I don't remember the whole quote, but if somebody here knows, it's not worth living. Yeah, and if we had a situation where coming out of school, in the popular media, in books, we were presented with options of sexuality, of gender, of relationships, and we all went on our individual journey, there was going to be instead of a rite of passage of going backpacking, whatever, there'll be this journey of self-exploration where we figure it out for ourselves, whether it's through trying it out, or whether it's through studying about it, or researching, or having therapy, whatever it is, depending on your personality. Then, yeah, asking all these kind of questions like why? Why am I doing this? Why am I in this pattern? And I think then you will get to a conclusion, to that outcome where everybody's done this exploration and answer those questions, and potentially on the way, learn that whatever relationship dynamic you choose, if you're doing it consciously, if you're aware of your boundaries, if you're aware of the way to communicate in a healthy way, if you're respectful of other people's boundaries, not even respectful, like welcoming and calling for your partner's boundaries, then all relationships will benefit, monogamous, non-monogamous, whatever.
Yeah.
Should we all read Ethical Slut in high school?
Yeah. We should all read Ethical Slut in high school.
Well, I'm very pleased to see people have put on their questions. So the first one, what is your view on why so much emphasis is placed on romantic connections? Non-romantic connections can deliver much that leads to fulfillment without, I don't understand, missing other romantic connections. It's more acceptance towards asexuality and also being consciously single. And it's like people are coming up with that and it's being more accepted, but I don't know in you guys, in your experience, if you've come across that.
I mean, asexuality is different from a romance.
Yeah, it is different.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, I want to mention relationship anarchy as a philosophy, because I think it encapsulates this whole idea that no particular dynamic or way of relating is inherently more valuable or less valuable. And platonic relationships, family relationships, romantic or sexual, it's up to you to decide what is the value of that relationship to you. And just because I'm having sex with somebody, or because I'm dating someone and seeing them once a week, it doesn't necessarily mean they're more important to me than somebody I see once a month that is like a platonic friend, for example. So I think that once we break down these mononormative and kind of social constructs of wife or husband is somehow inherently already like more valuable or more important than somebody who we're not married to, for example, then the value of non-romantic relationships can be expressed and shown. I have, and I think thanks to non-monogamy and this journey, and I don't think I've done it before, but since then, I can have cuddles and hugs with my platonic friends and be really happy and not feel any kind of weirdness about it. I can say I love you to multiple friends and knowing that this is a non-romantic, love, but still real love. And it's both liberating and it's also much more connecting because you can fully express yourself with the people who are important to you.
Yeah, we have another question about any cultures you are aware of open non-monogamy that is not Western cultures.
I would refer everybody to the podcast called /Queer. A friend of mine runs it, and they actually go to different places around the world and speak to people in communities who are actually non-monogamous in different cultures that are not in Western environments. Sorry, probably not a great answer.
So we were talking about the relationships and how it gives access also to resources, like couples are more wealthy. How does does this make you feel personally about your security to an exclusive relationship, or do you have now multiple exclusive relationships that you feel more secure also in that extent of just love, the relationship, or do you feel less because you have to spread out more your, commitment to your own resources?
What do you mean by exclusive?
Well, I mean, if you have a monogamous relationship, you are exclusive to each other, so you have resources access only to each other. If you have multiple relationships, you're sharing that as well. Like, does it make you feel more secure in your life in terms of, an economic situation? Does it make you feel less secure because you're more vulnerable to other, outside forces?
It's a really good question, actually, and I get it often. I am sure you do too. For myself, at least, I can say that I have a whole lot more love than I've ever had. Even last year, I had surgery, and I put in a group chat of a whole group of people that didn't know one another, and just said, listen, I'm having the surgery. I would love your support. If I need it, can I call out on you? And if anything, I never used to say I love you very easily. Say it to when I feel that sense of warmth. So I think for me, I've had to readapt what love meant. Before, I think in my monogamous days, it was very like status or an achievement. But now it's this full-on like warmth, just want genuine happiness for that person. And so I express that a lot easier than I did before.
For me, I think regarding the kind of the point of resources, like obviously, yeah, I agree with the point about like having kind of more love than I've ever had and kind of affection and kind of abundance. But, at the end of the day, we all have a limited amount of energy, and we have 24 hours in a day and 7 days in a week. But then, you also have to consider that not everyone wants the same amount of time from you. Not everyone wants the same thing when it comes to kind of your relationship dynamics. And so, yeah, if you're going by the kind of monogamous expectation of what is typically expected in a romantic relationship, then if you were doing that twice over or 3 times over, then yeah, I could imagine that, burning you out. And we have a name for this in the polyamorous community called polysaturation, which is very nerdy. But it just means you are saturated. You are experiencing kind of, if you do any more, you're going to burn out because you don't have enough time in the day or enough energy. So yeah, a lot of polyamory is, to be honest, being realistic about your commitments, not just to romantic relationships, just with life generally. What kind of job do you have? How many hours do you work? How much time do you want to spend with friends, with family, with volunteering, with hobbies, whatever? How much time do you want for yourself, for kind of self-care and rejuvenation or whatever? And then with your partners, do you want to invest kind of lots of time and energy into a select few, or do you want kind of one kind of more serious partner and then kind of some more casual kind of infrequent connections, or do you want kind of a mixture, right? So not everyone wants the same thing. And in fact, I have a friend who is monogamous, but she's dating someone who is polyamorous, specifically because she's I'm really introverted. I don't want my partner to be around me all the time. So it's great that they have other partners, because we can have the relationship that we want. And I don't feel burnt out because I know that they can be with other people, and that actually makes me feel so much less anxious because I don't have to be there for the kind of the energy that they have all the time. So yeah, obviously be realistic about the time and energy you have, and don't burn yourself out, and don't overpromise and overcommit, right? And I would say that for anything, not just relationships. And also recognize that different people want different things.
I think that your question around resources is also indicative of our culture being very focused on money and material kind of resource as the source of security, right? However, I think that in a lot of polyamorous people focus on creating a community, a tribe, a chosen family, where there's mutual support and accountability for each other, which often replaces the need for a financial based on security, because people are looking after each other when they're sick, or they bring them food when they need it and stuff like that, and that becomes basically going back to the whole kind of village mentality. So I know for myself, as somebody who practices solo polyamory, financial security personally is something I take charge of for myself, but knowing that if I do need help, I won't be a burden for one person. That one person wouldn't have to like take care of me by themselves. This can be something that several partners can share, and if that will be much easier, and friends as well, because again, you're building a chosen family network, and that includes also friends. Yeah. So in that sense, I would question whether we want to still continue looking at this idea of security from a capitalist lens. So can we start changing the narrative there?
Yeah.
Does this idea of polyamorous then means that there is not a possibility to have that partner in life with which you build something, but yet you are open to other things? It's a little bit of what you said about between the social monogamy and the sexual monogamy, right? But is it a exclusion, or could you just have that, kind of like partner in life, but yet be open to other?
There's no rule book, there's no guidebook on how to do polyamory. People do it so many different ways. There are people who are married and have a boyfriend or girlfriend, as well. People who, what you call a primary relationship or nesting relationship, that you can be married or not, but ultimately you are living, maybe having a family, having kids with somebody, but also having other lovers, friends. Sometimes it's sexual, sometimes it's romantic. It's up to you to decide and design the relationship that works for you. So if financial security and having a mortgage, having a house with somebody specific to build that life together is important, you can do that and still practice non-monogamy or polyamory, yes.
We have questions in the front.
Yeah, shall I grab it so that you can hear?
Sure.
Yeah. So you've spoken a little bit about the idea of kind of
Sorry.
being open to non-monogamy and polyamory, making you really value your friends more and appreciate your friends more, and there even being a little bit of a blurring of lines. So you're able to express love for your friends. So I think this is something that I've experienced quite a lot, and my concept of romance has got like incredibly blurred. I'm really, I definitely know there's people I have sex with and there's people I don't have sex with, but romance as a concept was something that I initially rejected entirely and have now fully embraced in all of my relationships. So I think the question that's slowly starting to form out of this is, for starters, individually, what are your relationships with romance? What does romance mean to you? And the second part of the question is maybe kind of flipping things on its head. I think we've spoken a lot about how when you're dating, you approach explaining to people like, this is my lifestyle, I am polyamorous, I'm open to seeing multiple people, but actually, how do you do that in your friendships? How do you communicate to your friends that you now see them potentially on an equal playing field, that you have this sort of deeper love for your friends that isn't necessarily below romantic relationships? Sorry, that's quite a lot.
From my end, it's just a conversation with the people in my life. I say that often, even from the beginning. I've dated people who are monogamous who will say to me, I'm monogamous. I'm like, totally cool. I make a great person in your life, regardless, and I will love you regardless. So I think it's, for me, I have similar conversations. They're very important in my life, regardless of sex or no sex. Romance is a great question. These are really good questions. But I'll pass the mic first.
I've always been, I think, a very romantic person. I hope my partner agrees. She says yes. And in a way, this polyamory gave me permission to do more of it. With more partners, and there's just like abundance of romance as well. But it changes. I think it changes in terms of like maybe there isn't as much time for grand gestures because as my life gets quite busy, and it's more in kind of smaller things. And I think my whole approach also to materialism and consumerism has changed as well. So that's part of it in terms of like, romance doesn't have to be about buying gifts or expensive holidays, whatever, but it can be about small intentions and the way you express yourself and like being present in the moment and really appreciating it. With friends, with some friends there has to be quite complicated, complex, long conversations for them to really understand me. Friends that I had before I came out as polyamorous that thought that this somehow will change things, and and also friends that after that I met and that basically, like say when they were single, we had a bit of like maybe a kind of an attraction or a kind of more of a had something, but then I knew obviously because they're monogamous, nothing will ever happen here because I don't date monogamous people, if I can help it. And so we had to have deep conversations, and through these deep conversations we learned so much more about each other and find a way to make it work. And I really appreciate having these connections in my life.
So regarding the question about romance, I think different people also define romance very differently. So then it's, is it is it the commitment? Is it the expectations you have, which may differ from person to person? Is it just vibes? Is it dopamine? I think maybe the reason why kind of so many people kind of prioritize romance above kind of others is because of the expectations that we have been taught to place on specifically kind of the exclusive one true love, right? The person who will be your other half and complete you, and stuff like that. So just to answer kind of the earlier question. But then, I question kind of the concept of romance as well, in terms of does it continue to serve me or hinder me in kind of forming connections with people? And, particularly if I have a different definition of romance from someone else, what does that mean, right? I think about kind of a casual partner that I had, a kind of friend with benefits-y kind of person that I was with at university. And one time, after sex, he kissed me on the forehead, and then I immediately just went to a full-on crush. And then because I interpreted forehead kisses as a romantic act, and it wasn't until at one other point where we actually had a conversation where I was that was the moment I realized I'm starting to kind of have these feelings, and he was like, oh, I just do that with people I sleep with, and I was like, oh, okay. So yeah, the lines are blurred, right? And I think that's why it's important to have conversations not just about how you feel, but also what you want to do with that. Because again, this is why love is a feeling, but it is also an action. And it doesn't mean shit if you're not kind of actively talking to people about kind of how you're going to show them love, and particularly showing them love in the way that they want to receive it, in the way that you kind of have capacity to give, and things like that. So I don't know, that was a bit of an all over the place kind of answer, but yeah, romance is fluid, yeah.
I have a question which is nice because it's about, for a balanced view, what are the downsides of being polyamorous?
Are there any?
So when I started this journey, going back to the beginning, I remember trying to own this, and dating was hard. Finding people to date when you're saying that you're poly. My friends used to say to me, oh, Jackie, it's so hard to find commitment in this city. My God, every single person I dated was like, I'm looking for the one. So for me, it was a real change. I really had to own it. And sometimes if we're not ready to own that part of our journey, you're going to find the wobbles a lot easier. So that is sometimes the downside, is you need to figure out what you want, own it, and move forward. I think the other piece that we don't appreciate enough is it's a lot of self-reflection. And yes, all of my friends growing up, when I spoke to them about my lifestyle, they're like, oh, you just figured that out now, did you? Well, thanks. But in reality, I had so much social conditioning that I had to work through myself. And thankfully, I took that time. Going back to that loving piece, it's really understanding how much time I need to figure these things out. And space. In my monogamous days, you get excited with somebody, you want to see somebody every day, you get really, intense. Actually, I had to back away from that and learn that that was just something that I had learned to do because I followed everything else that I was taught. So I had to really deprogram myself and debug. And if you're not willing to really put effort into it, yeah, there's huge downside, but so many benefits if you do stick by.
I'm gonna do something risky.
I wanted to. Personally, because I know that I am polyamorous, so I would say there's no downside, even though I am compromising on some things, or maybe I've given up some areas, but I think that generally, to be polyamorous or non-monogamous in our society now, there is still stigma, there is negative reaction sometimes from family and friends, which can be really difficult to process. And sometimes, families just don't understand, or basically reject or distance themselves from you. There is also the fact that so much of your energy is spent on communicating about relationships, and about communication. So unless you're a relationship nerd and you really enjoy that, it takes a lot of time. And if you have a full-time job, luckily for me, I this is also my career, so it's fine. But yeah, with a full-time job, it's hard because you do need to talk a lot about communicating about relationships. And it's a lot of investing in people, emotional investment in multiple people. It takes a lot of energy, and not everybody wants to spend that energy that way. So.
Yeah, I would add to that and say I also kind of because I started my non-monogamy journey very early. My first open relationship was when I was 17. So I can't really imagine another way at this point. But I would say that the kind of hardships and the kind of downsides of polyamory, so to speak, have all been opportunities for me to grow and challenge myself. People do hard things all the time that they find rewarding. I mean, I'm not a parent, but I know that having kids is fucking hard, and yet you guys do it anyway. So I think kind of polyamory the same way. If you think that ultimately the end goal is worth it and is worth the kind of the commitment and the rewards and all of that. Kind of whatever hardships you go through, it's gonna be worth it in the end. So what I said earlier about polysaturation, kind of stigma and judgment from people, kind of lack of protection in society and the legal and financial ramifications of that. Obviously, that's going to be hard. The lack of the social blueprint, like I said. But then I think this at the same time it offers you so much freedom to be able to really kind of pave your own way. So yeah, I don't. They're kind of downsides, but they're also not.
You just touched on kids. How you say, and you said that it's already hard enough to raise kids. How would you raise kids in a polyamorous situation?
I actually love the idea of raising children. I just don't want to give birth to them. Basically, some people joke, Leanne, maybe you should just be a dad. But anyway, I have a partner, and she's married, and she and her husband very much want kids. And kind of, I think the plan is that, I'll be a kind of co-parent. And I think because my partner, she has chronic fatigue from long COVID. I think doing anything for her is really difficult right now, but she and her husband desperately, they really, really, really want children. And I think it comforts her to know that there will be other people around, kind of what Roy said about the village, having, the nuclear family, by kind of how it's traditionally defined, is not sustainable. And I highly recommend this other account called Remodeled Love on Instagram. She is a polyamorous mother with 2 children, and she's written a book called Polyamory and Parenthood, which really kind of sheds light on kind of, children growing up in polyamorous families and kind of how they navigate that.
The nuclear family model of 2 parents and kids is extremely difficult in the modern age and in big cities, right? And I lived in China for several years, and there lots of parents live with the grandparents, and they have multiple extra adults at home to help. So I don't see that as any different. If you have more adults that can help and can lend support, even if you don't live together, but they can come and help and take the kids for a while, or just give you an opportunity to go out for a night out where you can feel human again and not just a parent, I think can be really beneficial. So in my experience with clients and with friends who have children, children who grow up in this reality, in this environment, they don't question it. It's just normal for them. If you were trying to introduce the idea that you're polyamorous to children when, say, they're teenagers, older, it can be difficult because they're already socialized, and it needs to be done with a lot of finesse and diplomacy and stuff, and like to do it well. But I think still there are ways of doing it to just like basically because the children I think are mostly just afraid that somehow they will be less of a priority, or that it means that their parent will leave because they're in love with somebody else that's not their other parent. So it's just about again raising children as well with values around honest, direct communication and abundant love. So they're ready also for that. And the more we can normalize the idea that it's there and it's in the in the zeitgeist, people are just aware of it, it'll be less of a shock. So I think it'll be easier to introduce it.
So I'm gonna mix things up a little bit. There's a comedian, I think her name is Rosie something. She's got a show now called Is Monogamy Dead? Has someone heard?
Just like polyamory is. I don't think we should kill ways that people live.
Can I answer that?
Sure.
Because I'm just
you want the mic?
No, it's fine. Well, unless you can't hear.
Take the mic.
Oh, thank you, Chris.
No, it's it's a genuine question given out of ignorance. I didn't even know what the subject of this evening was going to be about. But I'm curious to know what polyamory looks like long term. And part of the reason why I was thinking about it is how much we all have these giggles when we're talking about the sex aspect of it and how important the sex aspect of it is. Because I was reminded of a line in, this was called Dystopian Love, and I was reminded of a line in Orwell's 1984 where Winston says to Julia, you're only a rebel from the waist down. And so my question is, and maybe there isn't enough data here to know, you tell me, but like 5 years down the line in a polyamorous relationship, are you on Monday to Tuesday cuddling up in a non-sexual way with one partner watching New Wave French cinema, and Thursday to Friday cuddling up watching Love Island in a non-sexual way with the other? Or does the end of sex always mean the end of the relationship?
Lots of thoughtful questions. There isn't enough data overall to look at longevity in polyamorous relationships because it's only been, the research on it is not that old. But Elizabeth Sheff does have longitudinal research, and I think in terms of like relationship satisfaction, it's quite high in polyamorous relationships long term. Maybe you know more information about it, I'll pass it in a second. But also, I think that there's a couple of things in here that I would question even before we even get there, which is what do you mean by long term? Why is long term important? Right? Like, why are we valuing and measuring relationships by their longevity necessarily, rather than by how fulfilling and enriching they are to our lives? And also the value of sex in them, because whether you have sex or not, you can still have other ways in which a relationship is valuable to you and meaningful to you and important to you. And studies also in monogamous relationships show that sex does go down over time, and that is, and Esther Perel talks about it. A lot of behavioral biologists talk about it, and psychologists. It is kind of a given, and I think that also happens in polyamory. And perhaps in polyamory, you can experience this infatuation phases more frequently when you meet new people and have new relationship energy, and that can also like sometimes bring excitement into other relationships, etc. But I think that, at least from my perspective, valuing relationships beyond the sexual component of it has been a really big learning kind of curve for me within polyamory, which I didn't have in monogamy. Monogamy, if the sex died, then the relationship for me was dead. And I don't think like that in polyamory.
Can I just say as well, just to answer that question, I don't think monogamy is dead. I think there's just more option, and there's more option. I don't think that monogamy is dead. My grandfather actually was in polygamy. I had two grandmothers, and my uncles and aunts, I have 13 of them. They all live harmoniously, and like you said about it takes a village to raise a child and everything. But everybody else, all the children, they're all monogamous. So I think it's just a matter of like having the choice. The choice is more alive.
Yeah, so kind of referring to Rory's point about kind of the existing research, I think more research needs to be done for sure, but I would refer you to kind of Dr. Elizabeth Sheff's longitudinal, I think 20-year study on polyamorous families, particularly kind of children who grew up in polyamorous families, and just kind of like the effect on kind of children had over time, the kind of relationship satisfaction of the adults in the relationships. And more recently, Kathy Labriola, who is a therapist who specializes in kind of like polyamorous clients and who has previously written the Jealousy Workbook and the Polyamory Breakup Book, recently published, I think the book is called like Polyamorous Elders or something like that. So she interviewed like a bunch of polyamorous people in their old age, in their 60s and up. And I haven't read the book yet, but there's definitely going to be a wealth of information in there about like what polyamory looks like, when you're older, and like your bits don't work anymore and things like that. But also, I echo kind of what Roy said. Like, I think obviously, like sex is fun, novelty, and variety, and kind of like all these experiences are great, and particularly as a young person, I enjoy them immensely. But I think over time, what I'm realizing kind of more and more is that like it's the kind of connection and the intimacy and the commitment, frankly, that I value, more than more than the kind of sexual connection. I kind of like value them equally, and I think in long-term relationships, like even as kind of like desire wanes and kind of that kind of thing, it doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. I think Esther Perel is probably the expert on that in her book Mating in Captivity.
But what is the level of commitment? I mean, if you're part of a polyamorous group, doesn't commitment kind of spread on like, well, I'm not available to be there for this person now, but someone else should, and it's like passing off. Is this happening? Or also, you've been talking a lot about validating friendships through polyamory somehow, as in, why can't you go to, like if you're a monogamous person and you have friends that are very close to you, why can't they be considered a support group as valuable as a polyamorous group? Or why can't they be people that you go to and tell them you love them? Or, why does...
Yeah, that's what we're saying, like you can. And I think people should do that more, rather than being like, oh, we can't be too close, otherwise my partner will be upset.
That's just friendship that doesn't
yeah.
need to necessarily fall into the...
No, but, and I think we can very safely say that, like, in a lot of kind of monogamous relationships that you see, like, in the media and stuff, there's so many plots around, like, someone having, like, a friend who is too close, right? That does exist, that is a phenomenon, and I think we should absolutely be moving away from that and having kind of close platonic friends without that having to necessarily be a threat to your relationship. So like that's why we were saying what we were saying about how you should absolutely implement those things in monogamous relationships as well, and none of us are saying that that's impossible. But to your point about commitment, I think in monogamy, I think commitment has been associated with monogamy and exclusivity and marriage, right? Putting a ring on it. And that's the narrative. But, for me, commitment is like, supporting your partner, encouraging them to reach their goals, being there for them when they're sad, and kind of respecting and communicating and trusting and kind of all those things, and none of that requires monogamy. Regarding your point about like being there for someone all the time, in a monogamous relationship, like what if like someone's like busy at work and they can't be there for your partner? It's gonna be impossible to be there for your partner absolutely 100% all the time. I think I think having your partner having other sources for support is a good thing. Not having to rely on one partner to provide all of that, and being able to reach out to friends or other partners or what have you is a good thing. So I think it's just about decoupling kind of the idea of commitment as like exclusivity and being able to kind of like open it up to kind of more things, because ultimately I think it's about the connection and the promises that you make towards each other, the agreements that you uphold, and following through on those things. So that's what commitment is for me, making promises and the follow through. Because I need consistency and reliability in all kinds of relationships in order to feel security. Because if I can't rely on my partner, then what do we have? So that's kind of what commitment is for me.
I would love it if everybody just normalized, if you're looking for a serious relationship, that when you have a date and you have that connection with somebody, to just ask that question: what does commitment look like to you? Whether it's monogamy, non-monogamy, it doesn't really matter. Because even in monogamy, we can formulate different ways of approaching commitment.
Excellent. I'm just having a look at the time. I think we have some 5 to 10 minutes, 10 thoughts to wrap up. So I'm going to take the last questions. There's one here which I don't understand very clearly, but it's something along the lines of, is this a deemed rational thing?
Shall I ask it out loud?
Yes, yes.
Do you think there's a chance that this is just a sort of a fad, and in 30 years' time, we'll be having a panel like this, and we'll be talking about how important monogamy is?
It goes back to it being a choice. And now more than ever, everybody has a choice. So regardless of fad or not, in 10 years' time, somebody who's polyamorous might change and might say, you know what, I want this. That's it. So it could be for somebody, but I think that the key word here is choice. If we have the choice to make that decision, then not necessarily.
I would also, kind of like, this isn't a fad because people have been doing it for a very long time. So, I mean, there is that. Yeah, I mean, and I suppose the kind of like it's becoming increasingly common, but I don't think it's. Yeah, I don't think monogamy is dead. I don't think wanting to invest romantically or emotionally or otherwise in like one person and wanting to prioritize one person is is going to just fall out of fashion. I think particularly because of all the kind of stuff about capitalism that we said already. I think we do live in a society, so yeah, I don't think that's kind of dying out anytime soon, and I think polyamory is just going to become an option like everything else, and I don't think it's going to like take over or anything. And regarding kind of the point about like whether we're going to have panels about monogamy in the future, I mean, there was actually an article. I think we discussed this in our group chat, didn't we? There was like an article that came out in, I think it was Vice or Novara Media, about like something called radical monogamy. I think we took great issue with that article because it was basically just saying like, yeah, like wanting monogamy is good actually, and here are all the reasons why polyamory is shit. And it just, yeah, so then I think there are already kind of think pieces coming out about how like monogamy is like a radical thing to do, which is wild because have you been outside? But yeah, I mean, people are having these conversations, in some spaces.
One thing to remember is that non-monogamous cultures exist and existed for tens of thousands of years, probably longer. We have colonialism to thank for erasing most of these cultures around the world, but I think that our collective kind of human consciousness doesn't forget. And it's basically, it's in us, it's in a significant proportion of the population. I believe it's an orientation, just like being gay or bisexual, and that's my personal belief, but basically, I think that we are all different. We're on a spectrum, and it's great to be able to express that.
Yeah, I'll give you the neutral, purely based on research that I read and my interpretation. Okay, not so neutral. But neutrally speaking, totally agree. It's been around, we are inherently, as a matter of fact, we are non-monogamous. I mean, biologically, we are geared towards polygamy. It is a fact, it's not up for debate. Monogamy has been institutionalized, it's a difference. And that institutionalization was for the benefit of systems and structures, with the most powerful being capitalism, but it wasn't the only one. Now it is convenient, and data supports that people who are in monogamous couples are richer, and that supports the system. I'm sorry, but it is the way it is. I'm not saying we need to break away from capitalism, although it is an option. But, why not? But what I'm saying is that there have been forces, political and economical, that support this. I'm going to give you an example. People here know them, but I have 2 friends, they married, both of them are lawyers. They buy 4 houses now. They're 5 years younger than me, I only have 1.
It's hard, and it goes to your question of resources, because marriages were essentially economical. Marriage was not a love institution, and it had nothing to do with monogamy.
But why though? Why do, if you can pool resources with a group, like why doesn't that make the group like richer then? Like I don't understand.
Yes, like if you would institutionalize
You're talking about a closed group, right? So basically a closed group where everyone pulls the resources together. The concept of polyamory is that everybody's open and is free to love any way they want. If you limit it to the group, you're still restricting that love, that avenue for love.
But societies always organize themselves in groups. Like it's almost impossible not to, because of, there's like biological reasons for that. You can't know more than 100 people by face and name. Like you always do that. So isn't this just like a distribution model in the end? No, like seriously, like I believe that it shows statistically that couples are more wealthy. Like I don't argue about the facts, but I'm more talking about like statistics. Like are we talking about this is just a way of...
I think that if there was a legal structure that allowed people in multiple relationships to accumulate wealth together, to have legal contracts together, to pass on the inheritance to each other, etc., or to the kids of their other partner, etc., if that all is in the law, then probably that could change. Yeah. But the law is the law is designed to protect monogamy. And
you write your will and then you decide things. I mean, the default option is then going to the kind of like former partner, but you can also do that through,
And a few options nowadays. So in the US, I just read the article the other day. I can't quote anything, but I do know that they're actually looking at that. Is instead of it being a monogamous relationship and having the tax benefits and whatever not, they're actually starting to put on other people on there as well. So it doesn't have to be somebody you're married to.
Yeah.
So they are looking at that.
Last but not least, a question from Claire, and we have 5 minutes left.
I'm just curious about what you said just previously about polyamory means that you need to be completely open. Like, from my understanding, is that there's degrees, and that's what's agreed within the relationship context. It's not that it's always going to be open to all possibilities.
Yeah, I mean, like, kind of what I said earlier about kind of polysaturation. I think if I was polysaturated and I was kind of continuing to uphold the agreements that I had to my existing partners, and there was kind of no room to budge there, it would be highly irresponsible of me to seek more partners, because that would mean breaking my previous agreements. Obviously, some people will kind of have more flexibility than others, and some people don't have such strict like time and energy commitments and stuff like that. So there is some kind of leeway there. But yeah, I think there is a point, I suppose, at least for me, kind of like time and energy wise. But yeah,
that also relates to then like if we were talking about the sort of financial implications, then is that also not set up in the boundaries of whatever your agreements with the groups?
Yeah, like I think obviously we have to kind of acknowledge like the kind of realities we live in, whether it's like time and energy or like the systems we live under and things like that. And I think like not acknowledging that is irresponsible. So yeah, like I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
There's a distinction between the theoretical framework where polyamory means multiple loves. It's not biamory or triamory or quadamory, it's polyamory. And so that's one thing. It's like theoretically there should be the opportunity, the freedom for you to express that love in whatever way you, for yourself as an individual, feel is right. Now once you establish relationships, then you make agreements with your partner or partners. And that can look like whatever you agree and they agree, and all of you feel that gives you, meets your needs and helps you get fulfilled, right? So and that is within the framework of inheriting a mononormative mindset, of basically unpacking a lot of mononormativity, dealing with trauma and attachment wounding from childhood that makes you look for security in the structure of relationships. And all of that plays into it. So that's why you see different variations of closed polycules, triads that are closed, etc., or different agreements that limit or restrict your interaction with other people, etc. That does exist, but it is within the framework of the legacy that we are dealing with. It's not about polyamory as a concept.
I'll take a break because I think things are getting a little bit heated, which I love because this is what I wanted. So I find this very successful. One last one, and it's completely selfish because after all, I fucking work so hard for this event, so I deserve this question. And I'm very so the elephant in the room, and it's for monogamous. So how to deal with cheating, not for poly, in monogamy. What's happening with cheating? Why is that, Dina, that you are in a monogamous relationship, but there's this unhealthy thing around cheating? You can't accept it, but you also know it's happening, but turn the blind eye. But you know it's a possibility because after 20 years or 10 of fucking the same person, you just don't feel like it because it's biological. You just can't feel like it because it's just not how we're geared. I want someone to enlighten my way of how to deal with this situation in an open way, taking the learnings that the polyamorous friends are giving us. And why can that happen? Why is it so difficult to sit with your partner and say, I don't like this anymore, instead of going around behind their backs, like in Colombia, people have lovers, then the woman in response to that cheats back. And I know I'm generalizing because there are Colombian friends in the audience. No, it's not the case, but my friends from school are dealing with those situations. And it's unhealthy, it's toxic, and they still claim that they're monogamous, but they are, like in reality, they aren't.
And Marcela, isn't that the swingers club that offers up that? You can do that as a couple. You can share that experience.
Yeah.
Since I have been listening tonight to everybody's point of view, what I will get is there is choice, but at the end of the day, my reflection will be a word that I have, often two words that I haven't heard. It's emotional intelligence, and it's about everyone knowing who they are emotionally, where they come from, why they have been having those patterns, and what they want for the future. And that it doesn't have to do anything with being polyamorous or monogamist. And to go back to your last comment, I think it's the same. Someone who is cheating on somebody else after 20 years, maybe he doesn't have the guts to say, I'm bored. I'm bored, can we do something else? And this is emotional intelligence, and it's nothing to do with how you choose to live your life. It's how, as human being, we involve in communication, maybe. I don't know, I think do whatever with who you want to do, but be honest with yourself.
I was a serial cheater. So when people say, you know, I get the gender thing, but I was a serial cheater in my monogamous days. And it's because I was too scared. And it's not a lack of emotional intelligence. It's not saying I'm a bad person. I was too scared.
Too scared of what?
The reactions.
So it's not that emotional intelligence?
An element of it, but I could understand how the other person felt, and I was scared of hurting them.
Yeah, but if you came from your point of view, you don't scare the other one. It's maybe it's a projection of your fears to the other one, which is maybe a lack of emotional intelligence.
It could be, but it also could be a lot of the trauma that I had to deal with as a kid that came through.
Yeah.
But until you're ready to go through it, it's not a lack of emotional intelligence, it's just a lack of readiness, opportunity, people who support you to go through those things. I didn't, you know, when I started therapy years ago, people looked at me and I was like, why didn't I do this earlier? Because Jackie, you weren't ready. You didn't have the support around you, but that's not emotional intelligence. And I did say earlier about debugging. Debugging is so important because part of that is asking, what is it I want? What are my current patterns? Where am I currently now? Where do I want to go in 3 to 6 months' time? How do I get there? And it's like I said, you have to reflect. You just don't know any better, and you're scared. And you know what? It's great that you have that strength and integrity at the age that you did to have that happen, or like for you to do that, but unfortunately not all of us are in the same boat, and that's the beauty of humanity.
I totally understand what you're saying, and I think there is a stigma when people talk about emotional intelligence, because religions, you may be stupid. And very often what I don't like with that expression, but it's the expression with use in academics, so that's in the reference that I use. Personally, I prefer to use emotional consciousness because, as you said, and I totally agree with you, is with therapy, working through the trauma and really understanding, because once understand himself and all the reaction, your grown-up, your blueprint that you had as a child and as an unconscious, then you understand you did that later, and after you work through it to understand, you need time, and that's true, you can't do that when you're 20. He gets quite a lot of lifetime experience to go through that, a lot of therapy. Totally understand that, and I think that's maybe why those panels are quite interesting, to have different point of view and not project how model of the world in everybody else, and being open and honest.
Yeah. I have kind of more thoughts on infidelity as well. I mean, I think, I think kind of, like how people define cheating also kind of is quite broad, right? For some people, it's like, if you go and have have sex with someone, then that's cheating. And some people, like, if you form like a really close emotional connection with someone, that's cheating. And for others, it's like if you watch porn, that's cheating. So, it's a broad spectrum, and so it's not like, and this just goes for monogamy and non-monogamy, right? Like in non-monogamy, cheating looks a little bit different since you're not in an exclusive romantic or kind of sexual relationship, depending. But there are still kind of, agreements that you make with your partners that you have to honor and uphold. But I do think there's a difference between kind of like, like making a mistake, a moment of kind of impulsivity or inconsideration and whatever, and like active like duplicitousness, and kind of hiding something from your partner and lying to them over an extended period of time. I think there's also kind of degrees to cheating, and kind of in its kind of severity. And as someone who like has been cheated on and has also cheated, right? Like it's a very nuanced conversation. And I don't think cheating happens in a vacuum. I don't think kind of people I think there are very, very few people who are just kind of actively like, maliciously like cheating on their partner. It doesn't just kind of happen just randomly. Like a lot of the time, it's usually indicative of something either within yourself or like within the relationship or within your circumstances, right? Maybe like you feel kind of like restricted. Maybe your partner kind of wasn't meeting a certain need, and you didn't know better how to have a conversation around that. Maybe you were being abused and you were looking for an escape, right? Like there's lots of people who, like Esther Perel very famously said, the victim of cheating is not always the victim of the relationship. And so, it's a difficult question to answer because cheating can look like so many different things and can happen for such a variety of different reasons. And sometimes it's trauma. Sometimes it's the relationship you're in. Sometimes you're not a good match, or you don't know how to communicate, you don't have the skills. And sometimes the situation just kind of sucks. So yeah, I don't have like a general kind of answer to that, but just that it's a difficult conversation, and it's not as simple as the person who cheated is like a terrible person, and the person who has been wronged is like the victim.
So with that, I think Leanne is going to hang around, Jack is going to be around. I know Rob has to go somewhere, but if you want to say last words to them, they're going to be around for a little bit. Now we welcome wonderful Kate. Sorry for making you wait. Thank you for coming. Thank you.